pot. Just as success seemed assured, Knight received a dark letter from a Marlboro-clad cowboy claiming he was Onitsuka's exclusive U.S. distributor. He accused Knight of smuggling tigers into America and demanded immediate cessation of sales. Only 2 months old, Blue Ribbon Sports found itself in a legal battle that drove Knight into a deep depression. He looked as though he had been struck by a club. Onitsuka's headquarters remained silent. Nearly ready to fold, Knight summoned his courage and flew to Japan. There he discovered the manager who'd signed the original agreement had left the company. Undeterred, Knight met with Mr. Onitsuka himself and persuaded him to restore Western U.S. rights. Victory in hand, Knight placed another bold $30,000 order and returned to the States to reap the rewards at sports meets. Shortly thereafter, he ran into his college friend Jeff Johnson, who sold only Adidas. Knight dared him, to hell with Adidas, let's sell tigers. Johnson, viewing runners as God's chosen and romanticizing their struggle, joined with gusto. They agreed to double sales every season, but doubling required cash, which they lacked. Knight took ever larger bank loans. Bankers panicked, warning that such rapid growth without cash reserves was a ticking time bomb. Banks demanded he never spend beyond his balance. But to Knight, growth was life or death. If he stalled, Onitsuka would find another partner. So he floored the accelerator, ordering stock, borrowing anew, repaying loans just enough to stave off rejection, and then borrowing again. He enraged bankers begging him to slow down. But Victorian-era banks had no concept of venture capital, and interstate banking was forbidden. First National was his only option. Meanwhile, Onitsuka's chronic shipping delays and mistakes robbed Knight of precious selling time. Each late container meant fewer sales, fewer dollars to pay debts. Onitsuka ignored his desperate pleas as if yawned by an indifferent bureaucrat on an emergency call. Jeff Johnson kept the engine running. 7 days a week he hawked shoes. When sales dipped, he personally wrote runners, making each one feel uniquely valued. Many became addicted to his letters. Some customers confessed their own problems. One runner complained the sole lacked cushioning. Johnson hired a cobbler, transplanted flip-flop soles into the tigers, and produced shoes softer and more dynamic than ever. Bowerman, for his part, noticed tiger S-shaped in to suit American feet. They are longer than Japanese feet, so he modeled a new, more comfortable design. Johnson's basement soon overflowed with 3,250 pairs, forcing him to rent a small apartment as an office. They later opened their first store in Santa Monica, transforming it into an inviting gathering place where customers felt celebrated rather than sold to. Just as they found their rhythm, the Marlboro cowboy thundered onto the scene again, this time even taking out national magazine ads. Knight fought back with word of mouth and grassroots buzz. Then he flew to Japan once more to reclaim exclusive distribution. Onitsuka, which had cycled through yet another manager, granted exclusivity again, this time extending it 3 years, after Knight casually mentioned he already had East Coast branches, which he didn't. Back in Portland, Knight dispatched Johnson east to open that fictitious branch and accept the huge shipment. Johnson, whose store ran like clockwork, was livid. He saw the business he built being taken away. As the indispensable partner, he demanded a true partnership, $600 monthly salary plus 1/3 of future profits. Else he'd walk. Bowerman wanted to fire him. Knight balked. Sales volume still microscopic. There was nothing to divide. Johnson wouldn't sell his share, and Knight wouldn't dilute control. They finally offered a $50 raise and nothing more. Reluctantly, Johnson stayed, driven by love of the work and freedom of action. That year, Bowerman unveiled the Cortez, a sleek futuristic shoe for distance running boasting luxe cushioning. He also authored a book on jogging that inexplicably sold 1 million copies and ignited a national running craze. Yet he never once mentioned the shoes in his pages, so sales remained unaffected. The team hadn't the budget for fancy marketing. One rickety stand at meets did little to attract customers, but sales nonetheless rose 70% that year as Tiger II captured the US market. Onitsuka again begrudged Knight's success, extending his contract only 3 years instead of 5, then supplying wrong sizes and models. Blue Ribbon's warehouse overflowed with dead stock, while its hottest models vanished from shelves. Onitsuka prioritized his Japanese clients, leaving Knight to dance to their tune, hemorrhaging time and money. The absurdity peaked when a $20,000 shipment payment came due with no funds to cover it, a classic cash flow gap. Knight begged First National for $120,000. They refused. He advertised 30% of shares in a bid to raise capital, mailing thousands of flyers and heard only silence. Humiliated, he pounded familiar doors, asking friends for loans, but every plea was declined. By chance, he met a representative of NESA, a Japanese trading bank with deep pockets. They loved fast-growing firms and granted him the credit line he so desperately needed. Meanwhile, Knight-S spy in Onitsuka's Japanese HQ tipped him off that the company planned to drop him and sign with 18 other US distributors. Furious, 7 years of loyalty repaid with betrayal. Knight again had no choice but to remain locked in partnership. Onitsuka then mock offered to buy his business, knowing he couldn't refuse. Gritting his teeth, Knight postponed the sale by threatening rivals with legal letters, buying time to find an alternative. He secured a factory in Mexico and ordered 3,000 leather football boots, but needed a logo. He reached out to Carolyn Davidson, the art student he'd met at Portland University. Knight asked for a mark expressing motion. 2 weeks later, she delivered dozens of sketches, bulky lightning bolts, fat check marks, bloated squiggles, all nauseating. Except one, a simple, thick wing-like stroke evoking the whisper of air trailing a runner's foot. It captivated everyone. That swoosh was sent to the factory. Next came the name. The team brainstormed terrible options until Johnson announced he'd dreamt Nike after the Greek goddess of victory. Though not everyone loved it, time was up, and they went with it. The Mexican factory faltered. Cold winter weather cracked souls. Miso and Yamaha, two Japanese partners who'd extended credit, introduced Knight to 5 Japanese factories. He flew back to Japan, showed the Cortez, and at lunch discovered samples perfected. Returning to Oregon, he and Bowerman noticed outsoles hadn't changed in 50 years. Either waves or cross grooves, both offering poor traction. Bowerman's mind raced, and one day he spotted his wife's waffle iron. He borrowed it, cut a stainless steel mold, poured liquid rubber, and produced soles covered in square knobs like waffles. A test runner rocketed off like a bullet. Bowerman, inspired like Leonardo da Vinci, immediately put waffle-bottom shoes into production. In 1972, Knight had a rare chance to show off Nike worldwide at the Chicago Sporting Goods Show, where his mortal enemy, Onitsuka, stood. They expected him to announce his exit, but Nike's quality, despite some raw prototypes, and the swoosh's audacity, won over buyers. Orders flooded in. Johnson nearly shouted, "Wait, they haven't been tested." A retailer laughed. "We've done business with Blue Ribbon for years, you tell the truth, unlike the others who sell fairy tales." Reports say the show's success was seismic. Onitsuka's manager inquired, "What's Nike?" Knight coolly deflected, "A side venture to hedge in case you drop us." It disarmed him. Still, Onitsuka tore up the contract and billed Blue Ribbon $17,000 for delivered shoes. Knight invested in the career of runner Steve Prefontaine, a charismatic star who drew crowds wherever he raced. Prefontaine traveled the country as Nike's evangelist, preaching at track meets and drawing thousands into stores. In 1972, he set the US record in Nike spikes, generating massive publicity. By 1973, sales reached $4.8 million, a tenfold increase from $800,000 just 2 years earlier. Demand outpaced supplies, empty shelves became daily news, yet factories couldn't scale fast enough. Knight hung by a thread, sprinting to pay debts at the last minute. In 1974, Onitsuka sued Blue Ribbon. Minutes before trial, they offered to settle if Knight paid $800,000. They rejected the offer, hungry for blood. On its stand, Onitsuka accused Knight of deceiving them in 1962 and employing espionage. Knocked speechless, Knight watched as a private Japanese witness exposed Onitsuka's own plan to break the contract. The judge ruled for Blue Ribbon, and Onitsuka was ordered to pay $400,000 for trademark misuse. Knight retained rights to the Cortez model, but the yen's wild gyrations made Japanese factories too expensive. Knight decided to manufacture some shoes in the use to define bank warnings. He lived by the mantra, grow or die. Though payments sometimes nearly bankrupted the company, he pushed on. However, spring 1975 brought a horror. $1 million overdue on one payment with nowhere near the cash to cover it. He scraped every bank and store account dry. 2 days later, Exeter factory workers, unpaid, rioted at the gates. Help arrived from Nike's Japanese bank, which paid the loan. That same day, Waffle sold Nike sold out across America like hotcakes. Nike had outpaced Onitsuka and even Puma. Its shoes felt different, looked different, and with a lower price point captured imaginations like no previous model. By 1976, the Waffle trainer had transformed from niche accessory into cultural icon. At the US Olympic trials in Eugene, 3 finalists ran in Nike. Nike was now more talked about than any athlete. Puma, green with envy, nearly collapsed. To meet demand, Knight turned to Taiwanese factories, sprouting like mushrooms, to fill the void left by Japanese suppliers. By late 1976, sales had doubled again to $14 million. Financial analysts took notice, press coverage grew, yet Nike remained chronically cash-strapped, borrowing everywhere it could. In and the promise of victory. Today, Nike's Swoosh still stands for forward motion, relentless pursuit, and the belief that the next leap is always possible. Keep running toward what's next.